Hi everybody, this is Richard and Craig, and welcome to the first of our 4 feedback videos for maintaining a mindful life. Just so you know, each week we're going to make a feedback video which summarizes the most talked about discussion points and things that are coming up on the forums.
G'day Richard, it's good to be with you and all of our learners from, I believe, 120 different countries. Fantastic to all be connecting in this way all around the world.
How good is that? It's so nice being able to teach this stuff to people from all around the world, Craig. Yeah, beautiful. So lots going on this week, Craig. Some specific questions coming up actually from a lot of our learners. The first one's around our minds wandering, and does that get easier or does it happen less over time?
Look, I think one of the main things with a really experienced meditator and mindfulness practitioner is stopping worrying about the mind wandering. But I think one of the favourite topics that the mind wanders to when we've had a bit of experience is, why aren't I getting better at this? No, shouldn't it be stopping by now? So I think in a sense, if we can stop worrying about our progress and just come back to the practice, it's almost like planting a little seedling and just digging it up to see if the roots are taking, putting it back in. If the roots are taking, putting it back in.
Like the nurse coming in at night, are you sleeping well? And the patient in the hospital, yeah.
Just wanted to check if
you're asleep.
Yeah. So I think if we can just leave it alone and worry less about it, but if we're noticing the mind wandering and we're dropping it more readily, just coming back to the resting point for the meditation practice, then we just practice that. And we let the progress, in a sense, happen of its own accord. And it's not always during the meditation practice itself, but it's in day-to-day life that we start to notice whether or not, as it were, mindfulness is working. And we may not even notice it ourselves. Often it's something that others notice in us.
Yeah, right. I remember hearing a meditation teacher named Pema Chodron, who's been meditating for like 40 or 50 years. She one day said that her mind doesn't wander less. She just notices quicker that it's wandered. And I thought that was profound, a really reassuring thing. And it's the same for me. I would say my mind wanders probably almost as much, but I catch it a lot faster. And so I do spend a lot longer in the present. Yeah. And that sort of links into the second question that was asked, which is I noticed that my mind had wandered sometimes. I didn't even know where it had been. Is this normal? That's totally not normal. It's not a big problem. It's completely normal. In fact, we're sometimes so unmindful, we don't know how unmindful we are. And the fact that you're starting to notice that's a sign of progress. That's a sign of improved awareness and mindfulness.
Yeah, and we don't have to elaborate on it. Oh, what was my mind wandering to? But we will notice patterns over time.
Yeah.
Habitual things that the mind goes to, which can be quite informative. There was a question too about the right way to breathe when meditating, and through the nose and out through the mouth, etc. There are certainly lots of different yoga practices, for example, breathing exercises where the breath is regulated in a certain way. From a mindfulness perspective, we just let the breathing flow as it will. There's no particular need to control it or to regulate it. So we will often find changes in the breathing pattern, not because we're imposing it, but just because as the body settles, the breathing patterns change. But there's no particular need to regulate it in any particular way. If the nose is blocked, then you breathe through the mouth. If it's not, you breathe through the nose. It's all fine, whatever feels comfortable for the person to do.
Yeah, well, in fact, what we're trying to do with mindfulness is to practice allowing things to be as they are rather than being in this constant tug of war with reality, trying to get rid of the thoughts and change the breath and make myself relax and make that person stop doing that. We actually want to let go of all of that so we can practice that with the breath.
It's great that the body knows how to breathe anyway. I mean, imagine if you had to sort of consciously take the body knows how to do it, so just let it do it.
It does a pretty good job overnight while we're sleeping, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Is longer meditation necessarily better? That's a great question. And I think it really, that comes down to, what we're trying to really get from the meditation. Because any meditation is good. So 1 minute here and there throughout the day, in fact, peppering the day, as we've been encouraging learners to do, that can be really great. If we do sit for longer periods, often the first part of that sitting is just being with all the noise in the mind of, the busy sort of distraction that we start noticing. But after a while, sometimes that starts to just, like mud in a glass that you stop shaking around, just starts to settle a little bit. And that's a very useful experience, because then we can start to perhaps observe more things about the mind. We can start to notice what's going on in the mind. We can start to notice the effect that's having on the body, different mental tendencies. So there's definitely something about sitting for longer periods. But we always use the exercise metaphor. Don't run a marathon on day one. Do a little bit of exercise every day, and that's where you're going to really, I think, get the main benefits, right?
Yeah, and according to need, according to motivation, and so on. And we don't want it to take over a person's life, but certainly more regular and longer practices certainly help a lot. A lot of people starting to bring in little commas into their day, or just recognizing the need for them. But listening was quite an important topic. A few questions related to that, like how can you not label sounds? It kind of happens automatically in the mind. And I guess it's not like do not label sounds, because as soon as we do that, the mind labels us out and we got an idea we're doing something wrong. I suppose it's more a matter of there's no need to label sounds. So we're not trying to say, all right, well, that's a bird, or even what kind of bird is that, or that's a car, or that was a truck, so there's no need to label sounds, but we may well notice that the mind has this tendency to do that, to put a label. We hear a sound and then the mind starts thinking about the sound.
Yeah. And if I can interrupt, maybe the mind is constantly labeling everything.
Yeah.
And maybe we're experiencing the world not as it is, but through a cloud of labels and judgments and reactions to it. And maybe that's actually what we're starting to observe.
Yes.
Like this learner, when we start to do mindful listening practice.
Yeah. And so from a mindfulness perspective, we can just notice the label and just noticing mind labeling, but not having to elaborate on it, get caught up in it. Although, mind you, there are variations or aspects of approaches where observing particular emotions or observing particular patterns of thought and giving it a label, just naming it, that's a kind of a separate practice in itself. But when listening, there's no need to label it. But if we notice mind labeling and then thinking and elaborating, we just notice and we just come back to the listening. And even if there are no sounds, we just notice the relative lack of sound.
That's right. And then it's a very powerful practice, mindful listening, because when we're in the body, we're often unconsciously controlling things and reacting to things. When we start to listen, there's nothing we need to do to make the sounds happen, and we can just start to allow everything to be as it is a little bit more. And that's a very powerful practice. We can then bring that same sort of listening to thoughts, noticing thoughts when they appear and the intensity and the tone of them, but also noticing the gaps between the thoughts and how we're still completely here and present even when there are no thoughts, which is a very powerful thing, because a lot of us think that we are our thoughts, and suddenly there's these gaps where we're still very much present. Maybe even more present, perhaps. Yeah. And you can bring that same listening back into the body, noticing the sensations in the body arising and passing away without getting caught in them. And so that sort of whole notion of listening is actually very central to what mindfulness is.
Yes. And it's a very subtle thing. When there are no sounds or there are no thoughts, the next thing that generally happens in the mind is, there are no sounds.
There's a thought. There's no thoughts. I'm not thinking. Oh my God, I'm not thinking. That's amazing.
I wasn't thinking for a minute. No, I broke it up, and that's just another thought.
Yeah, that's right.
And
so, Jen was talking. Jen shared a clip actually about cognitive diffusion and the sort of thoughts just as like trains going past, which is the same thing. And we are that which is observing those trains going past, and that's what we want to give our attention to: the awareness that's noticing everything that's coming and going, rather than getting caught in all of those comings and goings and jumping on every train that goes through the station.
Yes. And you see, when we develop that ability to stand back from and observe and to engage or not engage, and like that sushi train sort of thing, you can pick something off the little sushi train if you want it. You can just let it go past if you don't. But if we are conscious during the practice, the mind presents some interesting thoughts, some tasty little things, but just let them pass, let them pass, let them pass, let them pass. And then we find in our day-to-day life, we develop the awareness and the ability to choose what to let pass and what to take up. But we have to develop our ability to stand back from it in the first place and let it all go, and then get better at choosing because occasionally we do have useful thoughts. not very often, but every 10 to 15 years, one of these.
Tasty bit of sushi goes past. It's actually nourishing. Might as well eat that one.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Hey, mindful communication was big as well. So I'll just briefly sort of touch on that. A lot of learners noticing that they were having trouble listening attentively, because we're often listening to our thoughts and judgments or what we're going to say next rather than what's actually being said. And, it's funny, Craig, because a lot of the times these questions and comments are posed almost like they're problems, like, oh, I'm having all this trouble listening attentively. But that's the mindfulness doing its work. It's great to notice that, because no one's really listening. And if we can start to notice that we're not really listening to other people, well, that's great, because then in that moment, there's the possibility of actually giving our attention to what they're saying, or, being frustrated with people who aren't listening to us. I mean, again, that's really important to notice, and to perhaps, invite them to pay more attention to what they're saying, or pause and wait for them to give us their attention again.
Yeah, and I think if we can kind of notice our own lack of awareness, then it can help us to be a little bit more understanding, compassionate for others, to realize, oh, others are in the same boat that I was. So I think that sort of compassion to others is a really important part of noticing this stuff, when we notice others are not as mindful as we thought.
Yeah, that's right.
Like we notice ourselves.
Yeah, the whole world's kind of sleepwalking around, aren't they? I mean, and you start to notice that when you practice mindfulness.
Yeah.
Final thing I'll mention is that so one of our learners noticed that when they're using their phone unmindfully, they're often not in a good place mentally or emotionally. And I think that's a very profound insight. Because yes, technology is addictive. It's designed to be addictive. There's a dopamine reward pathway in the brain that makes it addictive. But I think when we're getting addicted to things, it's often because we don't want to be with certain experiences. And that's a profound insight, that one. And so I'd invite all of our learners to notice that when you are lost in thought, overeating, using too much technology, et cetera, what's really going on that you don't want to be with, and see if you can just come back and be with that in a non-judgmental, non-reactive way, because that's a very good way of working with addictions.
Yeah, I think in some ways technology is becoming like a modern day form of the opiate of the masses.
Yeah.
And it's just something that kind of, anyway, it's an interesting thing to know, just diving for that and just whoa, step back from that impulse.
Yeah.
Don't have to be controlled by it.
Yeah. All right. So next week, well, first of all, please follow the course mentor, Jen, because if you follow her, you'll see more of her comments, and it's a great way of staying really connected during this 4 weeks of the course. Next week, we're going to look at mindful relationships. How does mindfulness help us have better relationships? We're going to look at cultivating things like empathy and compassion, which benefits us and our relationship with ourselves, but also, of course, our relationship with others. On that note, as we start to get into that territory, just remember this course is not intended as a sort of a therapeutic intervention. So please don't overshare, just be mindful of what you put into the forums, making sure that it's, just think about the synergy of the course and how what you say might impact others. And of course, if you do need additional support, if you start to notice that perhaps you are, having difficulties in some area of your life, that's a great thing to notice. But of course, there is extra support available, and there are some links in the course, ways of seeking that out, whether it's with a mental health professional or someone like that. But anyway, apart from that, we really look forward to reading the comments over the next week in the forum. So please keep that going. Please keep commenting. Please keep, supporting all of the other learners. And we look forward to making next week's feedback video. See you then.
See you then.